Hey, what is going on, guys? It is your boy Franzi back with another Genshin Impact video, and today I'm going to be making a tier list for Genshin Impact. This tier list is mainly going to be talking about the main DPS carry for a team. It is the unit you will have out on the field about 70% of the time. You know, it's basically everyone who's going to carry you through all the content in this game. So, before I start, I'm going to quickly go over my tiers. I have S, which is obviously the best of the best, and it goes all the way down to E. It has an own support. It has its own tier for supports because it's not fair to rank supports against main DPSs. They're two different roles entirely. This is mainly support and utility. I guess I should have put utility, but regardless, it is support. And obviously, there's its own tier for one specific character, if you can guess who that is. But anyways, before I start again, I'm going to say one or two things. So for the first thing, this is just my opinion. This is by no means fact. This is just what I think of the characters in the game. This is just a general guide or guideline for people to use. You know, if somebody is in S tier, it doesn't mean that they're, or if somebody's in D tier, doesn't mean they're unusable. You know, there have been people that have beaten this game on end game content. You know, Spiral Abyss level 12 with completely free to play characters like Lisa, Kaya, and Amber. You know, so just because someone is in a lower tier than you would like because they're your favorite character or whatever, doesn't mean you should get angry. You know, every character is good in their own right, but some characters are just better than others or have better kits. And then the second thing is I'm going to be assuming that all 5 stars have Constellation 0, and I'm going to be assuming all 4 stars have Constellation 6, just because it's pretty realistic to have just the one copy of a 5-star and to have no extra dupes, just especially limited time banner units. And then for 4 stars, yes, you probably don't have Constellation 6 at the moment, but the game has only been out for 3 months, so you know, in a year's time you'll probably have a lot of the original 4 stars at Constellation 6. So I will go ahead and start from the bottom and go to the top. You can go ahead and skip ahead if you want. I will have timestamps in the description below, but I'm going to go ahead and start with Amber. So obviously Amber has her own tier for a reason, and it's mainly because her elemental skill is absolutely garbage. It doesn't really, if you could explode it whenever you wanted, it would be 10 times better. But as it is, it explodes. It takes like 15 seconds to explode, and even then it deals very little damage. It's supposed to taunt, but it's so bad. It genuinely is just really bad. And her ultimate only lasts 2 seconds. I know with talents you could probably get that up. I'm not even sure. I haven't bothered with Amber since the very beginning of the game. There's a reason everybody memes on her and uses the Aqua meme, where I'm not useless or whatever, but she is. She's just not very good. Don't bother with her even in the beginning. Just use her until you get somebody else, and the game gives you plenty of other better characters. So I wouldn't never level Amber up until you have no one else, and even then only do it for the Acquaint Fate. Now this next tier is obviously listed as support, so this is kind of where it gets a little difficult because some units can be support while also deal DPS, but I think for the most part I'm going to put units here that their main role is support, and they're not versatile enough to be relevant in the DPS category, I guess. So I'll start off with Barbara. Obviously she's just a healer. Her DPS is very, lackluster. Her elemental skill is about healing, and so is her ultimate. It heals the whole party, so she is definitely a support. Bennett, you can make a case for being a main DPS. If you were to make a case, he would be D or C tier. He wouldn't be very good, but he is the best attack booster in the game, in my opinion, especially as a 4-star. And if you get Constellation 1, which, I mean, we are assuming Constellation 6 at this point. So if you have his Constellation 1, he is the best attack support booster in the game. So he is much more suited to just be that 4th or 3rd utility where he just boosts your number 1 or number 2 unit for them to do the damage. Diona, another huge support. She has her slow, her ice, her heal, her shield. She's fantastic. She is one of the best supports in the game, in my opinion. I think Cryo is really underrated element, especially for support, considering how OP Freeze is. Now, as we go, we can see Jean is another unit which could be considered a support, but I do think she is versatile enough and deals enough damage to be relevant in the main DPS category, so I think I'll save her for actually ranking her on the list. She could be considered a support, and you're not wrong to put her there, but at the same time, she could also be, main DPS worthy. Now moving on to Mona, she also has a decent kit that is relevant to support with her taunt on her elemental skill and her ult, which allows the rest of the team to deal more damage, but I do think she is definitely strong enough to rank on this main DPS tier list, so I will save her for later as well. Now, moving on to Noelle, she is obviously another support unit. You could make a case for main DPS, but she would not rank very highly, so I'm just going to put her where her main role would be, considering she has a shield and a passive one, a shield at that. She also heals, so she definitely deserves to be in the support category in my opinion. Moving on to Chi-Chi, absolutely support. She's all about healing. There's nothing else to that. Sucrose as well, all about support with his utility. Sucrose is basically budget Venti, so it makes sense for him to be support. He doesn't have the damage output that Venti is capable of though, so Venti does not deserve to be in the support category, although he definitely could fit in the support category. I think Venti himself is actually a decent damage dealer if you build him correctly. And then moving on, the only other support unit that I would probably put here would be Zinnia, but at the same time Zinnia is Pyro, so she basically is OP. So despite the fact that she doesn't deal a ton of damage, her element makes up for it, so I think you could rank her. She's one of the units that's 50-50 for me. She's 50 support, 50 damage, but if you put her on the tier list, she is going to be quite low, I think. So moving on to the E tier. This, unfortunately, is the domain of the main character. Both the Anemo and the Geo element main characters belong here. Unfortunately, it is what it is. I mean, the game is only 3 months old, and the main character is already one of the worst main DPSs in the game. But they did kind of balance this, since when you go to a new region, you unlock a different element. There's a chance for the newer ones to be better, and here's hoping for that, because the old ones, or the current ones, are very bad. Even with Constellation 6, Anemo, Traveler, I mean, it's really bad. All the first 5 constellations are useless. The last one's only okay. It just reduces Anemo resistance by 20%. So unfortunately for him, he has no place in most teams, or any teams at all. And then basically same thing for the Geo one. At the end of the day, he just isn't very good either. So unfortunately, the Traveler will rank in E tier. And the only other unit that will join the Traveler in E tier is unfortunately Lisa as well. Lisa has one of the worst elemental skills in the game. You have to literally sit there for 5 seconds. It feels like 30 seconds, but you have to sit there for like 5 seconds as you hold your elemental skill down, and then finally you can let go. And even then, you're not dealing any damage at all when you use it. And I mean, while you're holding it down for 5 seconds, you can't be interrupted, or you're just gonna have to start over again. It's such a poorly designed skill. Your constellations don't really help. I mean, you have less resistance to being interrupted. Is not that great. I mean, it still takes 5 to 6 seconds or whatever it is. And also having increased this defense just means like they want you to get hit, but it won't hurt as much. But like, that's terrible. You want to avoid being hit, and Lisa standing still is just not it. Her elemental burst is okay. But we're talking main DPS here, so she just doesn't cut it as main DPS. She doesn't deal enough damage. Her constellations don't help her at all. Unfortunately, Lisa is one of the worst characters in the game for main DPS. For D tier, this unit probably could have fit in E tier, but in my heart, he has a special place because he is one of the characters that I built up in the beginning, and I used him a lot. I'm going to throw Kaya in D tier. I think he's better than Lisa and the Traveler, but I think he's worse than pretty much the rest of the units on this list. Unfortunately, Kaya's elemental skill is only a small cone in front of him for freezing. If his elemental skill was, potentially 360 or just a wider range in general, he'd be a lot better. But considering how small it is, you basically have to line up your enemies, and that's just kind of annoying to deal with. I mean, it's more of a utility thing anyways, considering it doesn't deal a ton of damage. And then his elemental burst, is quite good, but at the same time, it just doesn't deal a ton of damage. He's more of a sub DPS / utility character. I used him as not really main DPS, but for utility a lot. His main DPS is severely lacking, but at the same time, it is better than the Traveler and Lisa. Unfortunately, his constellations do not really help either. I mean, he's got a couple of ones that are okay, like reducing cooldowns and some skills and giving more energy back. The only one that's really useful for main DPS is his one that gives 15% more crit rate on charged and normal attacks when attacking someone that's frozen or cold. So that's okay at best. I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's still not very good. It's not enough to be higher up on this tier list. So now we are finally on to the meat and the bones of the tier list. So for C tier, there's quite a few characters that fit here, and the first one I'm going to throw on is Bedeau. So hopefully nobody's mad at me. I know Bedeau is one of the more liked waifus or characters in the game, but at the end of the day, she's not as good as the characters in the above tiers. Basically, her elemental skill is about, you know, counters, and whenever you have a skill that deals with, you know, waiting for an opponent to strike at you, it's basically when you have to wait for something. You can't attack whenever you want to necessarily. It's always going to hinder your damage, or, you know, just what you can do in the game. Is definitely more unique ability. Not, I mean, I think she's probably the only unit in the game with a counter like that, but at the same time, it's not, you know, versatile enough. So I think she definitely belongs lower than a lot of characters. Her elemental burst is actually pretty good. It's basically creates, when you swing with your normal and charge attacks, it creates lightning between enemies, or that goes between enemies. At Constellation 6, you reduce the electro resistance of enemies. She also has constellations that increase the electro damage of her normal and charge attacks by like 20% when she takes damage. She also has a shield on Constellation 1, which is actually very helpful, but again, this is really not that great for main DPS. None of those constellations are going to help her a ton when she is trying to deal damage, you know? Like, shield doesn't really help. So at the end of the day, unfortunately, she is C tier, but again, like I said, every character in this tier list is viable and can beat endgame content. So C tier, while sounding pretty bad, is still, you know, good enough to use for sure. Now, I'm going to move on to a character that unfortunately I don't know all that much about, because this is pretty much the only 4-star in the game that I don't own, and it is Zinque, or Zinque. Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce this guy's name. He's Waterboy to me forever. Basically, he is more of a support character, because he has his elemental skill creates swords around him, water swords that protect him or reduce damage taken. They shatter when, you know, take enough damage. His ultimate also deals with stuff like that. So basically, he reduces a lot of damage taken, but he's very good, you know, sub DPS. And I know this is more of a main DPS tier list, but if you do use him, it's very easy to generate reactions. So I think if you used him as a main and, you know, switched out for subs, you know, through like Fischl's Bird on the field and use him as your main, you're still going to deal a ton of damage. So this guy, despite the fact that he does have a lot of support or utility in his kit, I do think that if you threw him on the field, he would fit decently well and do enough damage to be considered C tier. Like I said, this is one of the units I don't own or don't know too much about. I mean, I literally had to look up some of his things because I don't know that much, unfortunately. But I believe C tier is appropriate. If not, let me know in the comments below, guys. I'm very flexible on where these units belong. I think. I mean, he definitely could just be thrown in the support category, but I think C tier is relatively appropriate. So the next unit I'm going to throw on this tier list will be Xiangling. So she is the free-to-play character that you get for beating, I think, floor 3-3 on Spiral Abyss. So everybody has her. I'm sure everybody loves her. I mean, she's pretty much the best free pyro unit that you can get damage-wise. The other two are the 5-stars in Diluc and Klee. So I think, you know, this is the best fire unit aside from the 5-stars, I think. Unfortunately, she does have a lot of drawbacks. Her elemental skill, which is the Gouda bear, is actually really bad. I've used it so many times, and I'm like looking at an enemy straight on, and I'll throw it, and, you know, it'll be looking at him, and he'll just do a complete like 180 and shoot the other direction at an enemy that's like, you know, quote unquote closer or whatever. So her elemental skill is really annoying to use because it doesn't always attack the target you want it to, and that's a huge drawback. Her elemental burst is fantastic though, and I really like it. The problem is that she herself just doesn't deal enough damage to be on B tier. Her constellations are so-so in my opinion. The first one is if you hit somebody with the bear, then it reduces their fire resistance, I believe, which, I mean, that's like nice constellation, but it's pretty difficult to hit somebody with your bear sometimes. I mean, yeah, if it's a boss that just stands there, then sure, that's easy, but like if it's a moving enemy, you know, it's pretty tough because like its range is not super far. And then she also has an implode effect on our Constellation 2, which deals a ton of her damage as fire damage after a couple seconds. That's actually a very nice one. She also has a Constellation that increases the duration of her elemental burst, which is very nice. And I think the last one also gives a 15% pyro damage bonus to the rest of the team as well after using her ultimate. So she does have some okay constellations. Again, I would probably put her near the top of the C tier list, but I don't think she is worthy enough to go to B tier. So the next unit that they'll be putting in the C tier is Chongyun. Unfortunately, Chongyun is probably the best cryo damage dealer in the game, but he just doesn't cut it for the the element itself, I guess. I mean, if you compare Chongyun to somebody like Diluc, it's not even close, you know? He does have a decent kit, and, you know, when you activate his elemental skill, he does deal cryo damage, but it just isn't enough. Again, this is unfortunately a character that I haven't used too much, so I don't know all the specifics of his kit and all that, but I have used him, or I have seen videos of him, and he just isn't quite as good as some of the other characters above. So I unfortunately can't go into too much detail about him, but C tier is still respectable. He is definitely, you know, in the middle of C tier. He's not in the lower end like, you know, the other two. Finally, we have our first 5-star on the tier list, and it is unfortunately Jean. Jean is a great character. She is definitely more of a utility character, I think. I mean, you could throw her in the support utility, you know, column, but at the same time, I think she does do enough DPS to be considered at the very least C tier. I think she's probably, you know, probably a little bit behind Xiangling in terms of damage. Her skills definitely heal a ton, which is probably why she isn't, you know, higher. Her skills aren't necessarily meant for a ton of damage, but at the same time, you can, you know, your elemental skill controls where enemies are. You can put them in the, you know, basically all in the same place if you want to, or you can push them in one direction. It's very nice, and her ult is AoE animo damage, which also deals a ton of damage. Again, I'm considering her Constellation 0, like all 5 stars, so none of those will be added to her damage, which could potentially put her higher, but at Constellation 0, I think it's pretty safe to say she is C tier. She's definitely better than Kaya, so no question about that, and I don't think she's better than anyone above her, so I think C tier is pretty appropriate. Now, as for rankings in the tier, I haven't necessarily ranked them in the tier. I've put the ones that I think are best on the top, and then, you know, just kind of gone down, but like there's not much difference between Bedeau and Xingqiu, I think, and Chongyun and Jean are pretty similar, I think, too. Xiangling is probably the best in C tier though, just because Pyro is so strong. So finally, moving on to B tier, I have one of the best 4 stars in the game, Razor. I think Razor is amazing. He is an Electro greatsword user. His elemental skill is fantastic. It's on very short cooldown. It basically just deals a ton of electro damage, and it's still a small circle, but his elemental burst is where it is all at. It summons a giant wolf behind him / like floating above him that attacks with you. It constantly deals electro damage. It's fantastic. I think some of the best things about Razor are actually his constellations though. His constellations all increase his crit rate. They decrease the enemy's defense. When you pick up any elemental orb, it increases his defense by 10%. And then it's a Constellation 6, which is fantastic as well. It's every like 10 seconds or something, you deal 100% of Razor's attack as electro damage when on a normal attack or a charge attack. So all of his constellations are all about damage. This is one of the best 4 stars in the game. He will deal constant electro damage. He is fantastic. I don't really know where I'd put him in B tier, but easily B tier. Definitely better than everybody below him. So the next character I'm going to throw on the B tier will be Venti. Venti is another 5-star, so he has Constellation 0, but that doesn't really matter for him. He's one of the best designed characters of the game, in my opinion. He makes clearing content, especially Spiral Abyss, very easy, as he sucks all the enemies into one place with his elemental burst, and then you can just absolutely wail on them with any other unit like Diluc or something. He's just amazing in that regard. I know that sounds a lot like utility, but at the same time, when you use him for his Animo element and just trigger a bunch of reactions that way, you're constantly triggering reactions with Animo with his elemental burst, and his elemental skill is right there with it. It throws enemies into the air. That is great as well. Venti, despite being probably known as more of utility support, is definitely capable of dealing enough damage to rival everybody else in this tier. Now, obviously, I don't have Venti myself, so I only have videos and stuff to go off of and what I've seen. But from what I've seen, I'm very impressed with. I think he's easy B tier. I would rather use Venti in a team for main DPS than anybody below him. Moving on, this hurts for me to say, but I will have to be putting Mona in the B tier. So this is the first 5-star that I have ever rolled. As soon as I got this unit, I started my count and I played. I was very happy to get Mona because a lot of the tier lists at the time had her at top tier, but I didn't realize if that was more for support, or I guess utility, than it was for her actual damage, and I understand why now. She is decent at dealing damage, but at the same time, her animations and her attack damage does not deal as much as you expect or want from a 5-star, I think. but she does make up for it because her elemental skill is very good. It taunts an enemy when you use it, and if you hold it, you can throw it basically where you're standing and then, you know, run away. It basically launches you backwards, so it gets you, it's basically a get out of jail free card while taunting your enemy. It's very useful in a lot of situations, especially Spiral Abyss, because you can just taunt everyone into one location and then you can use some kind of AoE. And her ult is fantastic. It is one of the best in the game in my opinion. It deals a ton of AoE, you know, hydro damage, and it kind of drowns them. It's kind of hard unless you've seen it. It basically stalls them in place until you hit them, but it also allows everybody else in your party to deal a ton more damage. And this is unfortunately why she is B tier, because herself doesn't actually deal a ton of damage. She's more about helping others deal more damage. I mean, her ult definitely does hurt and it deals a good chunk, but it's just not on the same level as somebody in the S tier or A tier. So as much as it hurts, she is only B tier. I would put her near the top of B tier. I do think she's probably better than these two, but at the same time, all these units are very good. I mean, everybody at this point is excellent, and you know, you should definitely be leveling up any character in the top 3 tiers. And now on to the biggest disappointment in Genshin Impact history. It is Zhongli. So Zhongli is, how do I put this? This is pre-nerf, pre-buff, by the way. So once he hits 1.3, I think instantly he becomes A tier. I believe he can work fairly well as main DPS even right now. I have started to use him more in my team than Mona, so if that's anything to say about that, I have both Mona and Zhongli, and I am using Zhongli more, so there's that. He has his shield on his E, on his elemental skill, sorry. If you hold it down, you generate a shield. It's based off his max HP. His shield is actually quite strong. I only have 21k because I have terrible artifacts for him at the moment, but it is already a very strong shield. I can't wait to get a ton more HP on him, especially because his, you know, abilities will scale off HP in the future. But at the moment, he does deal some pretty lackluster damage compared to what he will in the future. I mean, his normal attacks will be based off his max HP later, but unfortunately for now, it is not. His elemental burst makes up for almost everything in this kit because his elemental burst is broken. There have been videos where somebody has used his elemental skill, or his elemental burst, excuse me, his giant meteorite, used it and instantly gotten it back. But obviously there's a cooldown, so you can't just spam it. But it's ridiculous how much energy he can generate. He is very, very strong, and petrification, despite only being, you know, 4 to 5 seconds depending on your talent level, is still incredibly strong. So I know that kind of sounds like utility, but at the same time, the meteorite does deal a ton of damage. So I think B tier is very appropriate. I think once he gets his buffs, I think he's easy A tier, but unfortunately for now, he is B tier. Moving on to A tier, we have one of the best 4 stars in the game, Fischl. So I know Fischl is mainly more of a sub DPS, and by that I mean off the field damage, where you basically switch to her, throw in Oz, and then switch out. But at the same time, she is, you know, good enough that you could use her as her main DPS, and she generates so many reactions. She's just so great overall. Her Constellation 6 just makes her deal so much more damage. Fischl is just fantastic, and I know I kind of want to call her free to play, but at the same time, it was only a 2-week long event, and you know, if you didn't log in during that 2 times, you didn't get Fischl. Oh, and also not just log in, but you know, complete the event, you didn't get Fischl. So I'm not sure whether to call her free to play, but if she is free to play, she is easily the best free to play character that they've given out. She is so good. I mean, I could go on and on about how good Fischl is. I think everybody knows she's good, so I think that's enough. She belongs A tier. End of story. Now, on to the next character in A tier is going to be Ningguang. I think she's the best 4-star main damage dealer in the game. I think she would be better than Fischl. Fischl is more of a sub DPS than main, but at the same time, Ningguang is just absurd. I mean, her first constellation turns every single normal attack she has into just AoE. So her normal attacks now just deal AoE damage. She is so crazy good. I mean, at this point, I don't think it's, you know, she's under the radar anymore. She definitely was in the beginning, but I think people have seen some ridiculous videos of her just one-shotting bosses at like world level 6 or 7. And if you build her correctly and use her jade screen and her elemental skill at the same time, you can just deal some ridiculous amounts of damage. I mean, you don't even really need constellations in her to deal the damage. That's the crazy part. None of her constellations are that groundbreaking to the point where you need them to deal the damage she can. So I think Ningguang is easily the best geo damage dealer in the game. I say easily the best geo damage dealer in the game, but actually recently there is something that makes me take that back. She is still absurdly good, and then for a 4-star, she is just so good. If you have her and you have not leveled her up, what are you doing? Just what are you actually doing? Because she's so stupid good. Absolutely level her up if you have her. Now, this is something that I am happy to say, actually. I was pretty wrong about Albedo. Albedo is the brand new 5-star that released a couple days ago, and at the time I said I don't think he's going to be very good. His abilities scale off his defense. But if anybody has seen him in the preview, he has awful artifacts in that preview. His weapon isn't like the best in slot for him, and he still just deals an absurd amount of damage. He's very good. I'm very happy to admit that I was wrong about Albedo. Now, do I think he's worth summoning for still? That's a different story. I still think that's a no, just because I think you need a new 4-star in a banner to make it really worth it. But regardless, he is a good unit. He's literally better than Zhongli. Now, Albedo is more like Fischl than he is like Ningguang. He is more of a bring him out, use his elemental skill, use his elemental burst, switch him out, and then rinse and repeat when his skill and his burst are up. So unfortunately, I probably would put him below Ningguang, considering Ningguang's a unit you'd want out on the field for her auto attacks. But Albedo is still great. The last character in the A tier list, I'm gonna have to throw my girl Kexing on here. So when this game initially launched, she was probably the character that I wanted the most. I ended up getting Mona and wasn't willing to reroll for more. I did reroll for her on my alternate, so I do have her and I've used her a lot. I really like Kexing. Her whole style is a lot of fun with her teleportation on her elemental skill and just her ult being where you just a ton of AoE, electro damage. She's so good, but the problem with her is that she is electro, and electro is just a worse element than pyro, and that really holds her back. And the fact that she just doesn't deal as much damage as some other people do. Her elemental burst deals like a little damage, but it deals it a lot of times, so it's not as strong as like just a giant AoE one-time damage dealing thing, if that makes any sense. Unfortunately for her, she just doesn't quite deal enough damage to be S tier. I would put her at the top of A tier, but at the same time, she just falls a little short of S tier. She is great though, don't get me wrong. If you have her, you should be happy. You should be happy and thankful. And now, finally on to S tier, the best of the best in my opinion. The best characters in Genshin Impact. So, we'll start off with the obvious one, is Daddy Diluc. I mean, really, do I have to go over this? This guy's absurd. His elemental skill combos so well into auto attacks. You can fit it in. You can find the perfect, animation canceling, all that good stuff. He's just like the dream for somebody that likes to fight with swords. He's really just so much fun to use. His elemental burst just deals an absurd amount of damage. And then, it's a giant AoE bird. He's so cool too. Like, he has everything. It's actually unfair. He's actually so good. It's stupid. He's the best element. He's like the coolest character. He's like the Chad, man. He is the Chad of Genshin Impact, and he deserves to be S tier. It's as simple as that. What else am I gonna say? He just deals an absurd amount of damage. Even after he ults, his auto attacks just do a ridiculous amount of damage. He's broken. He's broken. Even 3 months after launch, he is still one of the best characters in the game, and he will carry you through every single piece of content. Now, on to the other two characters in this tier. The first one will be Klee. Now, unfortunately for myself, I have not experienced too much of Klee. I have seen ridiculous videos of her, and she's broken. Absolutely broken. She's like Diluc, except she's ranged. She's not as smooth as Diluc, if that makes any sense. With Diluc, you can be smooth with your animations and elemental skill balancing, but with Klee, you have to animation cancel a lot. and it's not. It still works for sure, but it just doesn't feel as smooth as somebody like Diluc. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Diluc is better than Klee. I think they're both just stupidly strong. I think they're the best 2 units in the game, just mainly because Pyro is so broken. But I mean, how are you really going to compare the two? Like, one's ranged and one is melee. So I mean, if you want to play safe, I think Klee's better, I guess. But at the same time, if you have a shield or whatever, they deal a ridiculous amount of damage. Now, for the very last character I will put in this tier list, it is probably my favorite unit they've released in the game since they've started, and that is of course Child. So Child is pretty much my main now on my main account, so as weird as that is to say. He's the unit I use over everybody else. I use him all the time. The only time I will not use this unit is when I'm fighting the Oceanid, and even then I use him just for his bow attacks, for his autos, because he just hits like a tank. He hits like a truck even with his regular autos. But he is absurd. Even I know people made such a big thing about constellations for 5 stars, and they made a huge thing about Zhongli, don't get me wrong, but they still made a huge thing about Child because his first constellation is very, very helpful for him. It reduces his elemental skills cooldown by 20%, which is actually really, really good and really big, but at the same time it's not necessary. If you have other units on your team to like throw in the meantime, it really doesn't affect your damage output at all. He's just so stupid though. Like, when he's in my opinion, he's the most fun unit to use. He's the most well-designed unit next to Venti, I think. I think his mark that he leaves on units makes him very fun to play with, because you can transfer the mark, you can put marks on everybody, and then when you explode the mark, it just deals tons of AoE hydro damage, and then it lowers the health on the next opponent, and then he's closer to being able to deal hydro damage to everybody else too. Like, he's just so much fun. And then the fact that he has basically 2 elemental bursts, one being the bow one and one being the spear, I guess you could call it, is just, he's so well designed and he's just so absurd. I have yet to test him with the new hydro artifact set because I haven't gotten good artifacts yet, but I can't wait to do that. I think with that new set he potentially could fight for a top 2 spot, but at the moment I think he's a very clear third to the top 2 of Diluc and Klee. I think I did rank S in terms of who I guess these are 1 and 2, and then he's solid third. But I think he is amazing. He is my most favorite unit to use for sure. I was a little disappointed with him at first, but then I used him more, and I loved him every little bit. He's just great. I think he definitely deserves S tier. I think he's much better than Keqing, unfortunately, even though I really like Keqing. I mean, she's literally my YouTube, profile picture, but Child is just so much fun to use. He's great. He just deals so much AoE hydro damage all the time, and his animations look amazing. You look like you're dealing a ton of damage, and for the most part, you usually are. So he definitely deserves S tier. And so I kind of didn't rank Xenia because, I don't know, she's kind of hard for me to rank. I think I'd put her C tier if I had to, just because Pyro's OP. But she's more of a support, I think. I think any unit that has a shield is more of a support, even though I know her elemental burst kind of is about damage. So if you want me to put her on the tier list, I'd throw her in C, pretty low on C, maybe even D. Probably C though, just because Pyro's OP, so she's probably better than Kaya. But, support or C, you can pick. But either way, guys, that is going to be my Genshin Impact tier list. If you've made it this far into the video, I want to say first and foremost, thank you so much for watching. I put a decent amount of effort into this. I had to learn everybody's constellations, and that's not an easy job. But, I did a lot of work, and I really appreciate any kind of feedback. As long as you guys are a little bit civil about it, I'm totally open to discussions, and if anybody, wants me to move a character around, I'd love to talk to them about it. These aren't set in stone or anything, but I think this is a general guideline. I think this is a pretty solid guideline. I think if you followed this, I think you'd be doing very well. But anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching as always. Please like the video, please comment. I love talking to everybody. I love responding to everybody, having conversations. It's probably the most fun thing about YouTube for me right now, is just interacting with people on the internet about something I love. And then obviously, if you like my content or if you've watched anything else in mine, I'd really appreciate if you hit the subscribe button. It means a lot to me. That seeing that number go up every day always makes me happy. I know it's not about the numbers, but it does feel very good when that number goes up. So again, thank you for watching, and I'll definitely catch you guys in the next one. Peace.